Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's CUGC Connect webinar. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ and am very happy to welcome Goliath Technologies back to our webinar stage. Going to be talking about an important big topic today about reporting on remote workers' productivity and their user experience. Those are big issues right now. But before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of CUGC announcements for you. Our Women in Tech Mentoring program is currently open for applications. So if you have been interested in this program or if you don't know anything about it, that's fine too. But we do encourage you to come take a look. It's a great program. It's a one-to-one pairing. So you get put with a very accomplished Citrix professional, and you can talk about technology goals, professional development goals, whatever it is you'd like to work on. But we only offer this program. It only opens up once a year, and it's open now through September 30th. So if you're interested or know of someone who might be interested, please apply. You can scan that QR code to get to the application, or you can screenshot this page and copy that link and get to the program page on our website, which will tell you more about it. Also, just a reminder that we do have lots of local events coming up. Today is a big day. We have two combined meetings happening, one in the Carolinas, our Charleston, Charlotte, and Columbia groups, and in Texas, Austin, Dallas, and Houston. Definitely check out our events calendar, see if one of your groups is meeting soon. I'm sure it is. And also check out our upcoming XL events. Next week is our Midwest XL. Those are it's mostly a day. It's not a full day, but it's a good chunk of the day, and they're free. Great content, great technical speakers, lots of great information, and a good chance to reconnect with your CUGC family and just learn something new. So cruise over to our calendar and see what's going on. Hopefully it'll fit in your calendar and you can work it in. Also, just a reminder that if you've missed a webinar lately, all of our webinars are available to watch as recordings or to download through our website. So you can just navigate over to the files section on our homepage, go to the webinar recordings, and there is a full library. It goes back to 2015 of all of the webinars that we've ever had, so including all of Goliath's. So definitely check that out. All right, so couple housekeeping details for you. We are recording today's presentation, and you will receive a link to that recording. It's going to come to you in an email from GoToWebinar, so be on the lookout for that. It should come sometime tomorrow afternoon. Also, we're going to be taking your questions today live, but we'd like you to submit them as you have them. We'll take some during the presentation and some at the end, probably most of them at the end. And since we're going to save a lot of them for the end, if you would do us a really huge favor, and when you put your question in, just reference what your question is about, where in the presentation it is, or, just make sure we understand at what point your question is coming in at, so that we know what you're talking about. So it doesn't just say, how does this work, for example. So please reference, the specific technology or something like that. That would be great. And finally, at the end, I will be throwing a link in the chat for you to a survey. It's short and anonymous and for CUGC use only. All right, so all those questions that you're going to ask today, we have Carl Webster. He's a CTP fellow. He's going to watch all those questions for us and take some and answer some. Webster, would you like to say hello?
Well, hey, everybody. I'm glad you are here. I really love Goliath and the people there. Most of y'all know me for my scripts, and I'm glad you're here, and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you. And last but not least, our presenters. I'm happy to welcome back to our webinar stage Yemi, Lediju, and Stacy, Leidwinger. They've been with us before, so they're not new to CUGC, so I'm glad to have them back. And with that, I'm just going to hand things right over to Yemi and Stacy to get us started. And I think Stacy is going to take things away and kick things off for us.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to presenting here with you, Carl, as well. So as we go ahead and jump in, as Stephanie said, today we really want to talk about what are some best practices around reporting around the remote worker productivity and experiences. And before we jump into really how you measure that experience, I did want to take just one slide to review who Goliath is for anyone that is new to Goliath. And so what we offer is monitoring and troubleshooting software for the end user experience across your Citrix environment. And as you can see from the logos on the slide here, we do that for some of the largest Citrix deployment environments. And we also have the ease of use profile as well as price point that really fits into the smaller, medium-sized organizations. You can also see we have a stronghold in healthcare because we're able to go ahead and monitor and troubleshoot the entire experience from the end user, the endpoint, the connection point, all the way through the data center and the infrastructure of Citrix, as well as EHR systems. So we have purpose-built modules for Epic, Cerner, Meditech, and Allscripts that allows us to serve many of these health systems you see here. And one thing every one of these organizations have in common, if you ask them why they use Goliath, it's because when they leverage Goliath for their troubleshooting and monitoring needs, they say it has the equivalent of hiring 2 to 3 full-time experts who can proactively look for issues when it comes to end user experience, alert on those issues, and resolve them before end users are even impacted. And that's because of the embedded intelligence and automation inside the product. So with that, let's talk a little bit about why is it so hard to measure and quantify that end user experience within that infrastructure. So probably many of you today are wrestling with these questions that are coming from your end users, your business counterparts, your own management, and they're really starting to ask, are users as productive at home as they are in the office? Do they have access to the right applications? Is their performance working? Just before we kicked off the webinar, we talked a little bit about now that many families and homes have students going virtually, you might have 3, 4, 5 people all running a Zoom meeting at the same time. Do you really have enough bandwidth to allow that to occur? And how is that potentially impacting end users as they work? There's also, whenever there is an issue, how can you quickly isolate that root cause? Is it slow logons because of the network and their internet connection at home? Or is it because of something within the overall infrastructure? Or is it because they have an audio file running in the background? So a lot of these questions have existed. They're just amplified with now the increase of remote working. And this question isn't always easy to answer. Probably most of you on the phone know that it's a complex question because when someone logs into Citrix, it's not like they're logging into a single application. In fact, it requires over 15 technologies to really come and work together in tandem to deliver that user experience. So when you break it down, you think about your end users. Every single end user is unique. How they log on, what applications they load up at start time, do they have audio running in the background? All of that behavior is unique to the user. They have their endpoint, which is often unique. Where they're connecting in from, whether it be the office or their home office or another remote location, how they're kicking off their ICA session and that connection. Is it a home Wi-Fi? Are they on a hotspot? What is the level of internet service they have? And then from there, you go more into the data center. You have all of your elements from Citrix, from storefront to the NetScaler gateway, your broker services, your applications. So if you are in healthcare, you have your EHR applications. If you're in manufacturing, you might have your ERP applications. Below that, then you have your backend systems from SQL Server, your profile servers, Active Directory, and below that you have your hypervisor hosts. To even add more complexity, any or all of these pieces could be in the cloud as well. So many of you probably are dealing with a hybrid infrastructure where some elements are in the cloud, others are still on-prem. And so when an issue does arise and someone says, I have slow logon, it's extremely hard to isolate root cause and identify, is it something within Citrix or is it maybe a bad GPO mapping within Active Directory? And so being able to resolve that issue quickly becomes challenging, and measuring the overall experience. How long does it take to go ahead and deliver this? How many people have applications dropping in their experience? All of that becomes a challenge, and it's because of the complexity, it's a challenge. So to overcome that and ensure that you can measure the experience, report on it, troubleshoot it, you really need that end-to-end visibility so that you can see everything around the end user experience and what are they seeing from their perspective. The infrastructure, like we just identified, and all those IT elements. And then if you are healthcare, all the way to the EHR application. And that's really what Goliath delivers. And that's what we're going to talk to around when you have end-to-end visibility, what metrics are you reporting on and how are you reporting on them so that you as an administrator, your management team, even other vendors, your end users, your business counterparts, all can really understand what is the experience for your users when they're working from home? And do they have the best infrastructure to support them so they can be productive as they need to be in order to complete their job? So when we talk about collecting some of this data, right, it's not just about reports. It's really about data and how you use the data. And so as we talk about some of the data that I think really will help you define the end user experience, think about what you're going to do with that information and how you're going to correlate it. How are you going to share it? Are you going to be able to export it easily into PDF or CSV so that you can manipulate it outside of the system? Can you email it? Can you print it? How are you going to integrate it into third-party tools? Perhaps your IT service management system so you can see how it relates to actual end user tickets. Maybe your event management system because you have monthly reports that you're reporting on. And finally, you do want to be able to enhance it by leveraging out-of-the-box reports or even third-party visualization tools like Power BI and Tableau so that you can trend that data or even manipulate it with other data you're pulling from other data warehouses that you might be managing. But to be effective in really reporting on the end user experience, you must be able to share, integrate, and enhance that data, both in real time, but also historically. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Yemi that's going to talk about what are some of those key data points that you want to make sure that you're gathering and measuring so that you can quantify the end user experience end to end.
Thanks, Stacy. And you know, when you have all of this data, as Stacy mentioned, it's important to break it down into those sections that are going to allow you to understand, number one, the activity of the users, which we do in a number of different reports, right? We have productivity reports and peak usage reports, application usage, so on and so forth. So IT, as well as business line managers, can understand, are users actually working? What infrastructure do we need in place to support this type of usage? As you know, as you can imagine, you know, a lot of our customers and a lot of you on the phone are supporting remote workspaces now. So it's important to understand the usage, understand how the environment's being accessed, so that you can develop a back end that's going to be able to support that. Of course, productivity and activity is going to rely very heavily on performance and the experience of the users that are on those machines while accessing Citrix or anything else, or any other sort of virtualization environment. So having an understanding of the experience of the users while they are accessing the environment from their different locations or at different times and things like that gives IT an ability to not only troubleshoot those issues as they happen, but to understand exactly why productivity might be low, and it might actually have to do with the performance of the environment rather than you know, a lazy user or something like that. And then finally, of course, system performance, those back-end components that are going to pretty much be the basis of your virtualization environment. If you're having slow session hosts, or you're having or you're using legacy hypervisor platforms that, you know, might be degrading performance or sort of being a bottleneck to performance in your environment, it is important to understand that, so that you can leverage the data to justify the move to a new hypervisor platform, or to move to cloud or hyperconverged and things like that. So understanding these three sections and the data within them has been typically very important to our customers, and that's exactly how we are able to drive sort of business decisions based on the data that we have in our technology. So before we go into sort of sample reports, I'm going to stop really quickly and pass it over to the CUGC team so we can do some poll questions.
All right. We do have a poll for you. So on reports, which one report is most valuable to your organization to measure end user performance for remote workers? So you have end user productivity, application usage, license usage, logon duration, ICA latency. Of those 5 reports, which one is the most valuable to your organization? If you would like to see another report, put it in the questions. And then that way it'll be available to Goliath after the webinar, and they can actually see what other reports may be important to you in your organization.
It looks like half of you voted. And FYI, if you can't see the poll all the way, I think if you have the display in full screen mode, or if you can't, I think it makes it so that you can't click it. That was a go-to webinar bug once upon a time, but they may have fixed that. So. All right, I'm going to close it out and I'll share the results for you. There you go.
Very good. Perfect. And I think that is outstanding, because as we transition now into the sample reports, the first one that we are actually going to talk about is the end user productivity report. And I'm glad to see that this has been this is something that most of you would like to see. And from our experience, with the sort of parent workspace climate, this report has been extremely popular. This breaks down the user and how they're accessing the environment, their IP address, what infrastructure they leverage to access the environment, their start time and their end time for their session, and things like that. And of course, the duration of their session. But this is going to take it even further. And as you can see here, we break down the interaction time. So the amount of time that they are actually creating ICA traffic in their session. And this is actually, it's not a standard metric, right? The standard Windows, I think it's called the active time metric. This is completely different, because this is looking at the different individual channels that are being leveraged inside of a user session. And why this is important is because we can then apply intelligence to that to be able to come up with an accurate depiction of whether or not a user is actually working in their session. For instance, if the user is moving their mouse every 15 minutes or something like that, this would actually show you that they're only active in their session for about 1 minute, as opposed to the 15 minutes or something like that, that could or sort of screw, or it could be sort of a false depiction in some of the other metrics that are not really designed to monitor productivity. Things like maybe someone's watching a video for 2 hours straight or something like that. That's not very indicative of someone actually working in their session. So that's going to sort of flag that as inactivity. So there's a lot of different intelligence that goes into this report, but it gives you sort of an accurate depiction, leveraging some of the data that we collect, an accurate depiction of whether or not they're active in their session or not. Conversely, you can see the inactivity time for that user, their interaction percentage as well. And then finally, we have this max inactivity column, which is going to show you the maximum amount of time that this user was inactive concurrently in their session. Maybe they took 42 minutes to take lunch, or to go homeschool their kids or something like that. This adds additional insight into into that session to help you understand exactly how they're working. This is typically very helpful when you're trying to when you have sort of longer, let's say, VDI sessions, where there's inactivity of 4 hours, but it's all 4 hours at a particular chunk or something like that. So it tells you, okay, this user took a break. It's not like they were on their screen, just doing and having their screen up, pretending to be working while they're doing something else. So this report, and of course, if in a published application setting, this report is also going to show you what applications were being published via Citrix for those users. This report has been very, very popular and helpful to a lot of our customers, not just from a big brother perspective, right? But to help understand how users are working in this current climate. Where are they sort of connecting in from? What times of the day are they connecting in and leveraging the environment? And for instance, if they are still having problems and things like that, we have other reports to drill, or if the users are still or not being productive, we have other reports that allow you to break into their experience and understand, are they not being productive due to let's say, poor performance in their environment. Now, this is, of course, a CSV, this is a PDF, but you can export this to CSV. And a lot of our customers then, and I can show you on this next slide, put this into Excel and really manipulate the data to be able to put it in sort of managerial forms or formats so they can drive business decisions as well. So here you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, you can actually sort this by date. You can sort this by, by department. You can show, activity over the week or month, depending on, on most activity or least activity. So you can really start to export this and manipulate this in a way that's really going to give you the data in the format that's going to be more or most productive for you. And there's an additional a view of some of this data that's been manipulated in Excel. The next report that I wanted to touch on, we talked about productivity. The next one is end user experience, which is understanding the experience of the users while they are actually accessing the environment. Now, our end user experience report really comprises of, of course, logon duration, ICA latency, and their connection while they're in their session. So it tells you, are they having a poor sort of logon performance? Are they having slow connectivity inside of their session? And of course, do they have enough connectivity at their location to be able to support a responsive session? Here's another report that breaks down the logon duration. So this is going to be very heavily used by IT to understand not only the overall logon times in the environment, but also the different sub-stages of the logon process so that you can identify those portions of logons that maybe IT wants to focus on. Maybe group policies are getting a little bit high. Let's focus on that. Or maybe our profile load times across the environment are getting higher. We can sort of track these things and focus on specific areas that are going to drive logon times down in the environment. And of course, these are also CSV documents, and we've actually created some additional reports leveraging tools like Excel or even Power BI that can help track some of these things over time as well. So here's an end user experience report via Power BI that's going to show you license usage, or it's going to show you average logon times, or logon times based on application, based on the different sub-stages of the process, based on session count per hour. So you can sort of not only see the times and see the data, but correlate them to help drive some business decisions and ultimately deliver a better experience to the end users. So with that, I'm going to transition over to client stories and focus on how customers were able to leverage some of this data to actually drive solutions and be productive. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy.
Great. So one of the things that we often like to do is really articulate how organizations are using this data. So we worked with an organization, Empire Office. They provide office equipment, office supplies, really for large industrial size offices, and their headquarters is in Manhattan. So when the pandemic hit, they were one of the first organizations that sent everyone home, and they had 2 offices there in Manhattan. Their team, it's family owned. They are accustomed to coming into the office every day. They have design teams that are out there working with clients. And so while the CEO and the executive staff really trusted their employees, they wanted to know, could they be successful from home? Because that just had not been their work environment. And they weren't sure how they were going to have really data to understand if they had access to the applications they needed. Were they having good performance across their Citrix environment where they could be successful? And was the emotional toll too high from them when this first hit? And so they were looking for a report that really would allow them to understand how had working trends adapted or changed with everyone working remotely. And so we worked with them. We were able to leverage our end user productivity report, and they learned several things. One, they learned that their end users were starting work a lot earlier. They were working later in the day. They did see, looking at that kind of interaction report, that midday, some people would take an hour or 2 hour break. Many assumed it was actually working with their children that were at home, virtual learning. But what they really identified is that not only were their employees being productive at home, but they were working more hours. And this led to additional conversations with the team saying, just because you're working from home doesn't mean that we expect you to put a 10-hour workday. And they were also trying to identify how they could help some of these parents that were trying to do remote learning while still working their workday. And so they were building meetings around what was best for certain teams and certain groups that were working. And what they found in this report specifically, and they actually helped work with us around it, is that max inactivity, because they recognize people are going to walk away. They're going to have a cup of coffee. They're going to need a break. They might even walk down the street for a few minutes. But they did want to be able to see, were people really inactive for hours on end, and what was going on in that type of environment. But really, again, this conversation was driven really from an HR perspective. And when we talked with them, led to a lot of interesting conversations around culture and what will the work life look like, not only throughout the pandemic, but even moving forward. And does everyone need to be in the office when people do start coming back? And as people come back, who are the first teams that can maybe come back? Which groups maybe are more successful, more productive when they're together, like designers, versus back office and billing that were being quite successful at home? All right, Yemi, if you want to go to the next story. So that's an example on the productivity report. Another one I would say we get often, whether it is for remote workers or even on-premise workers, and we often hear about how can we meet our performance SLAs. So we were working with a large Midwestern hospital. They had several different hospitals throughout the Midwest, and they really were struggling when it came to performance times. So they were actually investing in a very significant Citrix upgrade. A lot of their back-end systems were being upgraded, and they were experiencing logon times that were sometimes over 2 minutes. And so they had committed that with all of these changes, they were going to get initial logons below 30 seconds and reconnects under 10 seconds. And one of the mandates from management was, if we are going to spend this amount of money into improving our experience with our end users, we want to make sure that we're maintaining it. Because at some point in time, we had good performance and it degraded as we added more systems in, added more people, changed the way people worked. Some equipment got older, et cetera. And so they wanted to report on a monthly basis that once these SLAs were hit, they were being maintained. So Yemi, do you want to talk through a little bit about what were the reports that they were looking at on a weekly and monthly basis, reporting into management, showing that they were meeting their commitment, and then also show how they use sometimes real-time data in order to identify when issues did occur. So if they found a user that had a login time, let's say over 2 minutes, how they were able to use that data so they could resolve issues quickly for their end users.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's another one of those reports. So we talked about our Logon Duration report, earlier, and that's one that they heavily use, right, to understand, okay, exactly what those logons were, and if they were reconnects, understand to be able to track reconnects versus initial logons over time. But they were also able to leverage reports like this, which is one of our Logon Duration reports, leveraging Power BI, where they were able to track logon times per location across per location for different days. Break it down per application. You could select the period at the top of the screen. So whether that is for a weekly period or, for weekends versus weekdays. But you can also see at the bottom of the screen that they also had the different sub-stages of the logon process here as well. So not only can they see exactly when logon times are high, depending on the application, depending on the day, but you could also see at what at those stages what portions of the logon times were really driving that poor performance, to help them sort of understand the environment from a logon perspective, and continually try to degrade the logon time so that they can meet their SLAs. Now, that is the data that they were able to get, historically. But as Stacy mentioned, sometimes logon times did experience some issues with logon times. And then in those cases, they needed real-time data to be able to troubleshoot those issues and align it to the infrastructure components that might have been driving that. And that's when they would flip over to the technology itself. So they would start off in this view, which is our automatic discovery and dependency map view for Citrix. And this portion of the technology, as sort of the name kind of implies, this will automatically discover all of those components in the environment that contribute to Citrix. It will map them out on the screen here and then apply over 250 monitoring rules to the environment. When I say monitoring rules, these are sort of intelligent alerts that are looking for conditions, failure points, thresholds, and events that can actually cause an end user experience issue. And these events or these monitoring rules then drive a heat map structure that's available on the screen. So as issues start to take place on components, like for instance here on the storefront server or this delivery controller, these components start to turn red, and you can click on them as I just did and investigate why this machine is having some issues. You can see resource utilization on the right-hand side of the screen, context-specific health checks based on the role of that component in the Citrix environment. So at any time when they're starting to see some logon issues or spikes in logon times, they're able to quickly take a look at their delivery infrastructure and understand if there are any components that are driving that poor performance. They could even, of course, take it further down into the delivery layer, where if the infrastructure view is a physical view, this delivery view is now a logical breakdown of the environment. And here it's all, again, intelligently mapped out, where you can see your delivery groups, your machine catalogs, down to the gold images if those are available. And as you click on an individual delivery group, for instance, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can now see resource utilization, as well as user experience metrics for the entire delivery group. Why is that important? Because you can tie this all back down to the components that are sort of supporting this delivery group. For instance, clicking on the machine catalog and being able to see the logon times per machine catalog. You're able to see things like ICA latency per the hypervisor cluster down to the individual hypervisor hosts that are supporting this particular delivery group. So in this case, this health system was able to identify whenever they would see resource utilization on hypervisor hosts negatively impacting the machine catalog, and you can see all of that as an aggregate view here. So as issues take place, they're able to quickly identify if it is a macro issue, or if it's something that is just affecting one or two individual users. In those cases where an individual user is affected, that's when they would flip over to this portion of the technology. This is our Citrix virtual apps and desktop session display. This is where all of the sessions in the environment will automatically populate. You can see your published shared desktop sessions. Here, it's a VDI environment, so you're able to see all the virtual desktop sessions. And so this is going to be your troubleshooting stop when issues are impacting an individual user. You want to understand what exactly is going into their experience. So you can go back historically and pull historical sessions. So we don't average or roll up any information we collect in our technology. So you get the same amount of granular data in a session from today as you would from a session from 2 months ago or 3 months ago. depending on how long you would like to keep the data for. So in those cases, you can, of course, pull back the sessions, search for an individual user, whether that is by leveraging our quick filter or by sorting or filtering by any one of these tabs that you see here on the screen. And once you've identified a user session that you want to look into, you can then click down on that session, and you now get a sort of detailed breakdown of everything that went into this user session for the time frame of this user session, all aligned here in one single view. So you're able to see details on the logon process, details on the ICA connection, details on that user's connectivity at their home location, which is of course very important when you're trying to troubleshoot slowness or issues with remote users. You can see the server that's supporting the session, the hypervisor host, applications and processes running in that session, even down to the alerts or event log conditions that have triggered inside of this user session. So effectively, once you get to this view, you're able to troubleshoot anything that comes up in their session. Now, for this health system, the logon performance section was super important. So when they click on their logon process here, you can see exactly what's going into the logon from a delivery controller perspective, like drive mapping, printer mapping, as well as what's happening at the client machine. And this is without deploying any technology to the user's endpoint. You're able to see things like ICA file download or how long it took to establish a micro VPN connection. And then at the bottom section here, you're able to see each individual stage of the process and how that's sort of affecting the session host itself. So for instance, I can take a look at authentication, where I can see the OUs that this user is a part of, what domain controller was in charge of authenticating that session. I can even see how long it took for those LDAP calls to take place. I can also expand the GPO section, where I can see each individual group policy that affected this user session down to the policy name and how long each one is taking the process. So in this case, the health system was able to identify specific policies that were sort of problem policies that were affecting multiple users, and then focus on sort of solving those particular issues. Now, this is in our sort of lab environment, so there's not much going on as far as logon delays, but I actually have a screenshot that I'd like to show that really breaks down the type of data that is available here. So you can see in this particular logon, you can see a long logon time, and in this case, IT is able to drill into the different sections in the group policy section and see each individual group policy with the policy names and how long each one is taking. So you can quickly identify those problems and focus on solving them, as opposed to spending your time looking through different consoles, your local policies or Citrix policies, and any other policy management software that you have to try and find those answers. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Stacy so we can handle wrapping up as well as questions.
Thank you, Yemi. And yes, we will be turning the mic over to Carl for some questions. But one question we often get, so if you do have them, please put them in the Q&A chat box, and please reference where you might be asking some specific questions so we recognize where in some of the screens or reports you're referencing. But one question we often get is, how long does it take to get up and running? Well, we at Goliath offer turnkey implementation services. So we have proven that we can get customers up and running in less than 2 hours. It's because of our white glove implementation services, which will automatically set you up with many of the out-of-the-box reports and alerts that you saw just here in the demonstration. Also, again, as I said early on, we have embedded intelligence and automation. So we are automatically discovering your entire Citrix environment. We're looking at all potential IT failure points, conditions, and elements where there could be an issue around end user experience. We're identifying those points. We're setting thresholds up on what would be unusual or poor performance, and we will automatically alert you should any of those thresholds be exceeded. That is all intelligence out of the box so that you can get up and running and start utilizing the system quickly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carl for Q&A.
Okay, so you were talking about all of these built-in things to get the reports and metrics and stuff. Almost everything of that is designed for a virtual environment, correct?
So I'll see if Yemi has anything to add, but yes, a lot of it is virtual, but a lot of the backend systems, the endpoints, not everything has to be virtual. So a lot of it is centered around the Citrix environment, but there's elements that are outside of that that we can also report around resource utilization. We have technology for endpoint monitoring as well as application monitoring that we didn't review today. I don't know, Yemi, if you wanted to add on to that as well.
Well, the specific question, and so when the COVID-19 work from home stuff started, you got this one big remote PC advocate for Citrix, that kept tweeting out that, hey, boy, we are selling a lot of remote PC licenses, and I'm a big fan of remote PC, and remote PC is physical. So when I have all of these workers that are going to use remote PC, wouldn't all those metrics be different? How am I going, how much work is going to be involved in saying, okay, I need these metrics for my virtual desktops, but yet I've also got a bunch of physical desktops that are being used for remote PC. How much work is involved in getting the metrics changed or updated or whatever so that I get different stuff for the virtual desktops versus the remote PC physical desktops?
Carl, I think that is a great question because we also saw that a lot of customers that didn't have the virtual infrastructure ready because no one was prepared for a pandemic, right? They didn't have the infrastructure ready, so they decided to move over to remote PC. To answer your question, there is no additional work required to be able to get those same metrics for round trip time, connection speed, bandwidth, and things like that for remote PC sessions. Essentially, from a Goliath monitoring perspective, it is all the same, right? Regardless of whether that VM is in AWS, whether it's a VM or physical server, or it's something that's on VMware or Citrix hypervisor, locally in your data center. It really doesn't matter because we leverage our lightweight intelligent agent that's going to integrate with Citrix at that session host. So whether that session host is your remote PC, whether that is a VM in AWS or Azure, whether it's a VM on premises, we can integrate with Citrix to be able to get you all of the information that goes into the logon time and the user experience while the user is on that machine leveraging Citrix.
Okay, so you talked about a lightweight agent. Is that how you are gathering the data on end user performance?
Yes. So we collect data a number of different ways. One of which is our lightweight intelligent agent. It's about a meg and a half in size. It takes up 0.1% of a CPU core. It doesn't require a reboot on installation and things like that. So it's really, really lightweight, but it really is the basis of our technology from an end user experience monitoring perspective because it's able to integrate with the ICA protocol at a very unique level to be able to deliver some of that information that we showed today. Of course, we also have agentless communication methods, whether that's via SNMP, API integrations into Citrix hypervisor, VMware, most of the major sort of hypervisor platforms out there as well. So we collect metrics through a number of different ways, but of course, one of which is our lightweight intelligent agent.
Okay, so for network utilization, would that be the SNMP or the agentless stuff, or do you have direct hooks into something like Cisco core switches and stuff like that?
So the technology does do some network monitoring. However, what we showed as far as with the Citrix session which is the connection speed of the user, or for instance, network latency for that individual user's session. That's all gotten through our integration with the ICA protocol. So the ICA protocol is typically going to be measuring the network that is available and also the connection speed because, of course, Workspace app is deployed on that user's endpoint. So the ICA protocol is always measuring that information, and through our integration with the ICA protocol, we're able to just collect that information and present it on the screen. So you're able to get all of that sort of network-related data and those metrics, and bandwidth-related metrics and connectivity-related metrics without the additional pieces of, connecting to Cisco switches and things like that.
So if you're looking at that, if I'm a work from home user, can you then provide the Citrix admins with proof that it may be the user's home Wi-Fi connection that's causing the issues versus their ISP? How do you prove that something is caused by the user's home network environment versus something outside of the house? Can you do that?
Sure, yeah, and that is exactly how our customers leverage the technology. I'm actually going to jump right into the technology to give you an idea of that. So we spent a little bit of time here on this summary screen, where you can see, of course, all of the data sort of at a high level that impacts the user session. So let's go through a quick troubleshooting workflow. Now, again, this is our lab environment, so there's not much data here, but I'll actually show you a screenshot from a customer, might add some additional context. But let's walk through this really quickly, right? So the first thing we can see, if a user, let's say, calls in saying, my Citrix session is slow, I can't do anything, I'm getting a laggy screen, or things like that, the first thing that our admins would do is look right here at round trip time. And I'm sure everyone on this call knows what round trip time is. It's just the amount of time it takes for whatever actions that the user takes to go through the network to the machine, back through the network to the user as far as the reaction. So the round trip time is going to be sort of the most accurate depiction of whether or not this user is actually having a problem or they're just having a bad day and want to take it out on MT, right? So let's say round trip time is super high, right? We can then look at this bottom metric here, network latency. And again, because this is the real-time network latency, not a ping-based network latency or something like that, this is what the ICA protocol is seeing in the network for this particular user session. So this is effectively session network latency. And you can see exactly at what points the network is going to be having latency or having issues, right? And then you can correlate, let's say round trip time is high and also network latency is high, then you know that the round trip time bottleneck or the issue that's driving poor performance for round trip time is actually something to do with the network. So effectively, you've ruled out VM resources or host resources as being the root cause of the slowness. Then we can look at this bottom metric here, connection speed. This is the amount of bandwidth available for Workspace app or Citrix receiver, if you have that, at that user's location. So wherever this user is connecting in from, their home office, Starbucks, maybe they have a wireless or mobile hotspot while they're on the road, right? You can see how much bandwidth they have. What is effectively their download speed while they're accessing their Citrix environment. So in this case, this user has pretty good connection speed, starts off with pretty good connection speed at about 110 megs, but then it drops down to about 17 megs. And so this is how you can correlate maybe drops in connection speed with spikes in network latency, which in turn gives you spikes in round trip time, telling you effectively that this user lost connectivity at this point, which is, let's say, 12:34, this user lost connection or lost a large amount of bandwidth at their home location, and that's actually why their slowness took place. Now, of course, that could mean they had a bunch of users get on the Wi-Fi at that particular time. Maybe they moved from one room to the other. We had, tons of examples of, doctors, let's say with larger homes, going up with their router in their basement, but they went up to their roof deck, right? And they complained to IT that they have the best possible connection from Comcast or something like that. They shouldn't ever have any issues with connectivity. But having the conversation with that end user and saying, hey, I can see you had really good connection, 200 megs at this point, but at this other point, you can see that it dropped down to about 0.5 megabits per second. What happened? What did you do? So that you can sort of drive home to the end user that you do have the data to be able to pinpoint why slowness is taking place. Did that answer your question, Carl?
Yes, it does. But now another one. I'm not having any problems. Well, I had no problems yesterday. I'm having problems today. What's wrong on your end? Because there's nothing wrong on my end.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And as you can imagine. Sorry, go ahead.
So can you look back in the past and say, well, yeah, you didn't have any issues yesterday. You had a 50 megabit connection yesterday. Today, you have a 130K connection. Can you look at that? Do you have any historical stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't average or roll up any information. So actually, the session that we're looking at right now is actually from August. So you can go back, depending on how long you would like to keep the data, you can go back and see all this historically. You can actually even search for an individual user and take a look at all of their sessions for the last, 2 months or 3 months, right? So if I type in the user, now I have all of their sessions. I can click on a session from, a long time ago and still get all of that data available to me inside of that session. So there you go.
Okay. So having all of this data and then all of these reports, is that restricted in any way by my license level with Citrix? Whether Citrix changes it almost every week, like advanced, enterprise, platinum, premium, super duper whopper license. Does any of that matter for Goliath?
No, yeah. So all of the data that we've shown today, you will be able to see regardless of Citrix licensing, regardless of NetScaler or ADM or ADC licensing. So that is all kept historically in our technology, regardless of any of those sort of external factors as well. Another thing that I want to point out is that this is all stored on-prem. This is not a this is typically not a cloud-based, right, SaaS offering. Now, we do have the ability to do that if you would like that, but this is typically on-prem, stored in a local SQL database, so you can pretty much determine how long you keep the data, and also what types of data you keep for particular periods of time as well.
Because obviously, the more detailed data you keep, then what the reports could take longer to generate. If I've got like 3 years worth of data because my company security policy says I can't get rid of anything.
Sure. Yeah. Now, we can't change the laws of physics, of course, right? So if you have 3 years worth of data that you're pulling up, it's going to take some time to be able to pull that up. But what we've done is we've optimized the database. We've optimized our technology. As you can imagine, we have customers that have upwards of 30,000 sessions, per day. So having an understanding or concurrent sessions, excuse me. So being able to have a responsive technology is of the utmost importance to us, and we're able to support those customers without any issues.
Okay, so if I want to take a look at this, how do I get started? Where do I go? What do I do?
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm just going to jump right back to the PowerPoint. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, if you wanted to have a free or start a free trial, please feel free to reach out to techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. We can get you started. We have a fully supported proof of concept. And as Stacy mentioned, you can have all of this up and running and collecting data in about 90 minutes or less.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. That's all the questions that our attendees had asked.
All right. I will grab the screen back really quickly. I just have a couple closing announcements. Just one sec. Although it looks like I see the question thing lit up. Webster, if you want to check that real quick while I'm
Oh,
grabbing it.
one just says thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Everybody see that okay?
Yes, I see it.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. Thanks, Yemi and Stacy. Glad to have you guys back today. It was great to have you on. And thank you to Webster for watching all these questions for us. One of those was really long and very detailed, so appreciate all that detail in there. Some of you may have opted in for a chance to win a Lego Star Wars Millennium Falcon set. We will do that drawing offline. I like to get the full attendance report so I can make sure that I have an accurate count of who all was here, and I'll use the Google randomizer and randomly select a winner. We'll announce that winner on Twitter, so make sure you follow us at MyCUGC on Twitter. It's also a good place for you to just stay up to date on everything CUGC is up to. And then just want to make sure you all come out to mycugci.org periodically and check in on the forums. There's lots of great conversations happening out there. You can ask questions, you can answer questions, help somebody out. It's a great place to go. Also, just check out any of our upcoming events, find today's webinar and other recorded webinars. And also, our Excel events that I talked about that we've been having online, we have the recorded sessions from those. So if you haven't been able to make our Excel events, you can go find the recorded sessions and watch those. And with that, I'm just going to thank everyone again. Thank you all for being with us today. And thanks to everyone, Stacy, Yemi, Webster, thanks again for being here.
You are welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks
very
for
much.
everyone staying on.
All right, everyone. I hope you all stay healthy and safe and well and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you on another CUGC webinar again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.